The placebo effect is the most embarrassing phenomenon in modern medicine. It is embarrassing because it works. It works reliably, reproducibly, and sometimes spectacularly, and after more than 70 years of rigorous study, no one can fully explain why. A patient takes a sugar pill, believing it is medicine, and their pain decreases. Their blood pressure drops, their depression lifts, their immune function improves, their Parkinson's tremors subside, their irritable bowel symptoms resolve. No active ingredient has entered their body. No pharmacological mechanism has been engaged. No molecule has bound to any receptor. And yet the patient improves measurably, objectively, sometimes dramatically. The body heals itself in response to nothing more than belief, expectation, the conviction that healing is happening. This is not supposed to be possible. The biomedical model, the framework that has governed Western medicine for 3 centuries, treats the body as a machine. Machines do not respond to belief. You cannot fix a broken engine by believing it is being repaired. You cannot lower your blood pressure by expecting a pill to lower it not. If the pill contains no active compound, the body is supposed to obey chemistry, not psychology, molecules, not meaning. And yet the placebo effect demonstrates, with decades of controlled experimental evidence, that the body responds to meaning. That psychology alters physiology. That what you believe about your treatment changes what your treatment does, even when the treatment is nothing. Henry Beecher brought the placebo effect into mainstream medical consciousness. Beecher was an anesthesiologist at Harvard Medical School who served as a combat medic during World War II. When morphine supplies ran critically low on the battlefield at Anzio, Beecher began injecting wounded soldiers with saline salt water, telling them it was morphine. To his astonishment, approximately 40% of the soldiers reported significant pain relief, not just subjective reports of feeling slightly better. Significant, functional pain relief enough that soldiers who would have been writhing in agony were calm, manageable, able to be transported without the extreme distress that untreated battlefield injuries produce. Salt water. No opioid. No analgesic compound. Just the belief that they were receiving medicine, the authority of the physician, the context of medical care, the syringe, the injection, and the pain subsided. Beecher was a rigorous scientist. He did not romanticize the finding. He returned from the war and spent a decade analyzing it. In 1955, he published a landmark paper, The Powerful Placebo, in the Journal of the American Medical Association, in which he analyzed 15 clinical trials and concluded that approximately 35% of patients responded to placebo treatment across a wide range of conditions. The paper transformed clinical research. It established the randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial as the gold standard of medical evidence, because if a third of patients improve on sugar pills, any drug must prove that it outperforms sugar to be considered effective. And the paper raised a question that medicine has been struggling with ever since. If a third of patients get better on sugar pills, what does that tell us about the relationship between the mind and the body? The evidence has only grown more remarkable since Beecher. In 2002, Bruce Moseley, an orthopedic surgeon at the Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, published a study in the New England Journal of Medicine that sent shockwaves through the surgical community. Moseley performed arthroscopic knee surgery on patients with osteoarthritis, a common procedure in which the surgeon inserts a small camera and surgical instruments into the knee joint, repairs damaged cartilage, and flushes out debris. The procedure was performed hundreds of thousands of times per year in the United States. Surgeons believed it worked. Patients believed it worked. Insurance companies paid for it. Everyone agreed it was an effective treatment. Moseley randomized his patients into 3 groups. The first group received the standard arthroscopic procedure debridement and lavage. The second group received lavage, only flushing the joint without repairing cartilage. The third group received sham surgery. Moseley made the same incisions in the skin, manipulated the knee to simulate the sounds and sensations of surgery, splashed saline to simulate the lavage fluid, and then closed the incisions. The patient was under sedation. The operating room looked, sounded, and felt identical in all 3 groups. The only difference was that in the sham group, nothing was actually done to the knee joint. The results were devastating for orthopedic surgery and illuminating for the science of placebo. At every follow-up point, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, the sham surgery group improved as much as the real surgery groups. There was no significant difference in pain, function, or patient satisfaction between patients who received actual surgical intervention and patients who received an elaborate theatrical performance of surgical intervention. The knee surgery was no better than pretend knee surgery. The placebo was as effective as the procedure. One of the sham surgery patients, a man who had been unable to walk without a cane before the procedure, was walking and even playing basketball within months of the surgery. He remained convinced for years that he had received the real operation. When eventually told that his surgery had been sham, he was incredulous. His knee was better, his pain was gone. He had returned to activities he had abandoned years ago. The healing was real. The surgery was not. Moseley's study was not an isolated finding. In 2014, a systematic review published in the BMJ examined 53 trials comparing surgical procedures to sham surgery across multiple specialties. In more than half of the trials, the sham procedure was as effective as the real one. Sham vertebroplasty, a procedure for spinal compression fractures, was as effective as real vertebroplasty. Sham angioplasty produced equivalent outcomes in some cardiac studies. Sham arthroscopy matched real arthroscopy across multiple joint conditions. In 2018, a Finnish trial on subacromial decompression surgery, one of the most common shoulder operations, found that sham surgery was equally effective. The surgeons had been cutting tissue for decades. The patients had been improving for decades, and now it turned out that the improvement had nothing to do with the cutting. The ritual of surgery, the anesthesia, the incision, the operating room, the recovery, the narrative of repair was the active ingredient. The scalpel was the placebo. The implications are staggering. Surgery is the most invasive, the most physically dramatic, the most materially consequential medical intervention. It involves cutting tissue, removing structures, altering anatomy. If the placebo effect can match the outcomes of surgery, if belief alone can produce the same healing that a scalpel produces, then the relationship between mind and body is not what modern medicine has assumed. The body does not merely respond to physical intervention. It responds to the meaning of the intervention, the narrative, the expectation, the belief. Fabrizio Benedetti, a neuroscientist at the University of Turin and one of the world's foremost experts on the placebo effect, has spent decades mapping the neural and molecular mechanisms through which expectation becomes physiology. Benedetti's work has demonstrated that the placebo effect is not a single phenomenon. It is a family of phenomena, multiple distinct mechanisms through which psychological expectation translates into biological change. The best understood mechanism involves endogenous opioids, the body's own pain-killing molecules. When a patient receives a placebo painkiller, a sugar pill presented as morphine, a saline injection described as a potent analgesic, the patient's brain releases endorphins and enkephalins. These are the same molecules that the brain releases in response to actual opioid drugs. They bind to the same receptors. They produce the same analgesic effect. The placebo does not merely distract the patient from their pain. It triggers the same neurochemical cascade that real painkillers trigger. The proof came from a decisive experiment when Benedetti administered naloxone, a drug that blocks opioid receptors. The placebo analgesic effect was eliminated. Block the opioid receptors, and the sugar pill stops working. This proved that the placebo pain relief was not imaginary. It was neurochemical. The brain was manufacturing its own medicine in response to the belief that medicine had been administered. But pain relief is only the beginning. Benedetti and his colleagues demonstrated that placebo treatment activates distinct neurochemical systems depending on what the patient expects. Patients who expect pain relief produce endogenous opioids. Patients with Parkinson's disease who expect improvement in motor function produce dopamine, the neurotransmitter that Parkinson's disease depletes. Benedetti used PET scans to image the brains of Parkinson's patients receiving placebo treatment and found significant dopamine release in the striatum, the brain region most affected by the disease. The placebo was not just making patients feel better, it was producing the specific neurotransmitter that the disease destroys. The brain was compensating for the disease in response to the belief that it was being treated. John Carr Zubieta at the University of Michigan extended this work to depression. Using PET imaging, Zubieta's team demonstrated that placebo treatment in depressed patients activated the mu-opioid system, the same system targeted by some antidepressant medications. Depressed patients who received placebo showed increased opioid activity in brain regions associated with mood regulation, including the anterior cingulate cortex and the prefrontal cortex. The brain was producing its own antidepressant in response to the expectation of antidepressant treatment. And the magnitude of the placebo response in depression is substantial in many clinical trials. Placebo response accounts for 50 to 75% of the total response to antidepressant medication. The drug adds something beyond placebo. But the placebo, the expectation of improvement, contributes the majority of the effect. The immune system, long considered to be autonomous, operating independently of conscious thought, is also responsive to placebo. Robert Ader and Nicholas Cohen at the University of Rochester demonstrated this in a landmark 1975 experiment that launched the field of psychoneuroimmunology. Ader and Cohen paired a sweetened water solution with cyclophosphamide, an immunosuppressive drug, in laboratory rats. After repeated pairings, the rats' immune systems became conditioned. When given the sweetened water alone without the drug, the rats' immune systems suppressed as though the drug were present. The taste had become the placebo. The body had learned to suppress its own immune function in response to a sensory cue that the conscious brain associated with immune suppression. Manfred Szydlowski at the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany extended Ader and Cohen's work to human subjects. In a series of studies, Szydlowski's team conditioned human immune responses using the same paired association paradigm. Participants received an immunosuppressive drug paired with a distinctively flavored drink. After conditioning, the drink alone without the drug produced measurable immunosuppression. The participants' immune systems responded to a strawberry milkshake as though it were a powerful pharmaceutical. The conscious mind had taught the immune system to suppress itself. This is not psychology mimicking biology. This is psychology programming biology. The mind is literally reprogramming the immune system through learned association. And the inverse works too. Gustavo Pacheco Lopez, working with Szydlowski's group, demonstrated that immune enhancement could also be conditioned. If the unconditioned stimulus is an immune-stimulating drug rather than an immune-suppressing one, the conditioned response enhances immune function rather than suppressing it. The taste becomes an immune booster. the mind instructs the body to strengthen its defenses using nothing more than a flavor associated with a previous experience of immune activation. The implications for clinical medicine are enormous. If immune function can be conditioned, if the body can learn to produce specific immune responses in response to placebo cues, then the relationship between mind and immune system is not a one-way street from biology to experience. It is a two-way highway. The mind informs the immune system obeys. The pharmaceutical industry has a problem. The placebo response in clinical trials has been increasing over time, particularly in the United States. A 2015 meta-analysis by Jeffrey McGill at McGill University examined 84 clinical trials of pain medications conducted between 1990 and 2013 and found that the placebo response in pain trials had increased by an average of 30% over that period. The drugs had not become less effective. The placebo had become more effective. Patients in more recent trials responded more strongly to sugar pills than patients in earlier trials. This trend has made it increasingly difficult for pharmaceutical companies to demonstrate that their drugs outperform placebo, not because the drugs do not work, but because the placebo works better than it used to. The reasons for this increase are debated. One hypothesis involves the growing scale and expense of clinical trials in the United States. Modern trials are larger, more elaborate, more heavily staffed with attentive clinicians. The patients receive more attention, more care, more interaction with medical professionals. This enhanced context, the ritual of the trial, the white coats, the monitoring equipment, the sense of being cared for, may amplify the placebo response. The healing context matters as much as the healing substance. Another hypothesis involves cultural expectations. American patients are exposed to more pharmaceutical advertising than patients in any other country. They arrive at clinical trials with stronger expectations that the medication will work, and those stronger expectations produce stronger placebo responses. The belief has been primed by culture, and the primed belief produces biological results. But the most challenging finding in placebo research, the finding that fundamentally defies every conventional explanation, comes from Ted Kapchuk at Harvard Medical School. In 2010, Kapchuk published a study that should have been impossible. He gave patients with irritable bowel syndrome placebo pills in bottles clearly labeled placebo. The patients were told explicitly that the pills contain no active ingredient. They were told that placebos have been shown in clinical studies to produce improvement through mind-body self-healing processes. They were told that they were taking sugar pills. No deception. No hidden active ingredient. No ambiguity. The patients knew they were taking placebo, and they improved significantly. The open-label placebo group showed nearly twice the improvement of the no treatment control group, an improvement comparable to the most commonly prescribed IBS medications. Patients who knew they were taking sugar pills got better. Kapchuk has since replicated this finding across multiple conditions: chronic low back pain, cancer-related fatigue, allergic rhinitis, menopausal hot flashes. In each case, patients who knowingly took placebo showed significant improvement compared to patients who received no treatment. The effect sizes are not as large as those seen with concealed placebos. Deception amplifies the effect, but they are clinically meaningful and statistically robust. You can tell a patient that the pill is fake, and it still works. The details of placebo delivery matter in ways that expose the role of meaning in healing. The color of a pill affects its potency. Blue pills are better sedatives. Red pills are better stimulants. Yellow pills are better antidepressants. Green pills are better anxiolytics. These color effects vary by culture. In Italy, blue pills are less effective as sedatives, possibly because blue is the color of the national football team, and carries associations of excitement rather than calm. The form of delivery matters. An injection produces a stronger placebo effect than a pill. A capsule produces a stronger effect than a tablet. A larger pill produces a stronger effect than a smaller one. 2 pills produce a stronger effect than 1. A brand name placebo produces a stronger effect than a generic placebo even when both are sugar. And the physician matters. A warm, confident, empathetic physician produces a stronger placebo response than a cold, uncertain, detached one. The meaning of the encounter, the quality of the relationship, the conviction of the healer, the ritual of the interaction is pharmacologically active. It changes chemistry. It changes outcomes. This finding demolishes the standard explanation of placebo that it works because patients believe they are receiving real medicine. In Kapchuk's studies, patients do not believe they are receiving real medicine. They know the pills are inert, and yet the healing occurs. Something other than belief in a specific medication is driving the response. Kapchuk proposes that the open-label placebo works through the ritual of treatment itself, the act of taking a pill, the structure of a therapeutic relationship, the embodied experience of participating in a healing process. The body, he suggests, responds not just to the expected pharmacological effect, but to the entire context of healing, the caring clinician, the structured protocol, the act of swallowing, the habit of taking medicine at specific times. The ritual is the medicine, the context is the compound. Then there is the nocebo effect, placebo's dark twin. If positive expectations produce positive physiological changes, negative expectations produce negative physiological changes. Patients who are told that a treatment may cause side effects are more likely to experience those side effects even when the treatment is a placebo. In clinical trials, patients in the placebo arm routinely report the exact side effects that the informed consent form warned them about: headaches, nausea, fatigue, dizziness, despite receiving no active substance. Their bodies produce the expected harm in response to the expectation of harm. The evidence for nocebo is chilling in its precision. In a study by Reif and colleagues at the University of Marburg, patients were randomized to receive identical placebo pills but with different information. One group was told the pill might cause gastrointestinal side effects. The other group was told nothing about side effects. The group warned about gastrointestinal problems reported significantly more gastrointestinal symptoms than the uninformed group, despite taking the same inert pill. The information created the symptom. The words spoken by the physician became the disease. In statin therapy, cholesterol-lowering drugs used by millions of people worldwide, the nocebo effect may be responsible for a significant portion of reported side effects. A landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2020, the Samson trial, used a clever 3-way crossover design. Patients alternated monthly between statins, placebo, and nothing without knowing which was which. 90% of the side effects patients attributed to statins were also experienced during placebo months. The patient's muscles ached, their energy dropped, their sleep suffered, but it happened just as often on sugar pills as on statins. The expectation of side effects primed by news reports, internet forums, and physician warnings produced the side effects. The belief made them sick. The most dramatic evidence for nocebo comes from cases of medical hexing. Clifton Mador, a physician at Vanderbilt University, documented the case of a patient in the 1970s who was diagnosed with metastatic liver cancer and told he had months to live. The patient died within the predicted time frame, but the autopsy revealed almost no cancer. A few small nodules on the liver, nothing that should have been fatal. The diagnosis, the authority of the physician, the expectation of death, the nocebo framing may have killed the patient. The body produced the expected outcome: death. Walter Cannon, the Harvard physiologist who coined the term fight or flight, studied this phenomenon in the 1940s under the name voodoo death. He documented cases from indigenous cultures around the world in which individuals who believed they had been cursed by a shaman or witch doctor died within days, with no identifiable physical cause of death. Cannon proposed that the mechanism was a massive sympathetic nervous system activation, a lethal fight or flight response triggered by the absolute certainty that death was imminent. The adrenal glands flood the body with stress hormones, the heart races, the blood vessels constrict, and if the activation is sustained, if the certainty of death does not waver, if no counter-belief intervenes, the cardiovascular system can collapse. The belief killed. Not a poison. Not a disease. Not a weapon. A belief. Modern cases confirm that nocebo death is not limited to indigenous cultures. In 2007, Derek Adams, a 26-year-old participant in a clinical trial for an antidepressant, attempted suicide by swallowing 29 capsules of his trial medication. He collapsed, was rushed to the emergency room with dangerously low blood pressure, and was treated for a drug overdose. 4 hours later, a physician from the clinical trial arrived and informed Adams that he had been in the placebo arm. The 29 capsules he had swallowed were sugar. Adams had not overdosed on anything. There was no pharmacological reason for his collapse. His body had produced a near-lethal response to the belief that he had taken a lethal dose of medication. Within 15 minutes of learning the truth, his blood pressure returned to normal and his symptoms resolved. The belief that he was dying was making him die. The belief that he was safe made him safe. Consider where this evidence leaves us. The placebo effect is not imagination. It is not wishful thinking. It is not the patient merely feeling better while the disease continues unchecked. It is a measurable, reproducible biological response in which the brain produces specific neurochemicals, alters immune function, changes gene expression, and modifies physiological processes, all in response to expectation, belief, ritual, and context. The body listens to the mind. The body obeys the mind. And the mind does not need to be deceived for the effect to operate. Open-label placebos demonstrate that even the knowledge that the treatment is fake does not prevent the body from responding. And then there are the cases that medicine cannot explain at all. Spontaneous remission, the disappearance of disease without medical treatment, is documented in the medical literature, but rarely discussed. The Institute of Noetic Sciences compiled a bibliography of over 3,500 cases of spontaneous remission published in medical journals, cancers that disappeared, autoimmune diseases that resolved, infections that cleared without antibiotics. Cariel Hirschberg and Brendan O'Regan analysed these cases and found that they span every type of cancer, every stage of disease, and every demographic category. They found no consistent medical explanation, but they found a suggestive pattern. Many patients who experienced spontaneous remission reported a significant psychological shift before the remission occurred. A change in belief, a change in emotional state, a moment of profound acceptance, or profound defiance, or profound connection to something larger than themselves. The psychology changed, then the biology changed. Kelly Turner, a researcher at Harvard, studied over 1,000 cases of radical remission from cancer and identified 9 common factors. None of them were medical treatments. They included changing diet, taking control of your health, following your intuition, releasing suppressed emotions, increasing positive emotions, embracing social support, deepening your spiritual connection, and having a strong reason for living. These are psychological and spiritual factors. They operate through belief, meaning, intention, and relationship. They are, in the broadest sense, placebo factors. Factors that work through the mind's influence on the body rather than through direct pharmacological or surgical intervention. Spontaneous remission is rare. It cannot be prescribed. It cannot be reliably reproduced. But it exists documented in peer-reviewed journals, verified by imaging and pathology, undeniable in its reality, and it raises the most provocative question in all of medicine. If the body can sometimes heal itself from cancer, from a disease that involves rogue cells multiplying uncontrollably, then what are the limits of the mind's influence on the body? Where does placebo end and miracle begin? And is there a difference? And now the question that has been hovering at the edges of this investigation, the question that the traditions have been asking for millennia and that medicine has been avoiding for centuries, becomes unavoidable. If the mind can heal the body, what is the mind? What kind of thing is it that can produce endorphins from expectation, dopamine from belief, immune changes from ritual, and death from certainty? What kind of relationship exists between consciousness and the physical body that allows thought to become chemistry, belief to become biology, and meaning to become medicine? It is worth pausing here to note that none of this is news to the traditions. 2,000 years before Benedetti mapped the neurochemistry of placebo, Jesus of Nazareth told a woman who had suffered from bleeding for 12 years, a woman who had spent everything she had on physicians without improvement, "Your faith has healed you." He did not say, "I have healed you." He said, "Your faith." He located the healing agent in her belief, in the quality of her expectation, in the intensity of her conviction. And the Buddhist tradition opens its most important collection of teachings, the Dhammapada, with a statement that could serve as the epigraph for the entire field of placebo research. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become. These are not vague spiritual platitudes. They are precise claims about the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. And modern placebo research, with its PET scans, its immunoassays, its double-blind protocols, is producing data that aligns with these claims with uncomfortable precision. The conventional answer is that the mind is the brain, that mental states are brain states. That expectation is a pattern of neural activity that triggers downstream neurochemical and physiological cascades through well-understood neural pathways. This answer is not wrong. The neural pathways exist. The neurochemical cascades are real. Benedetti has mapped them in extraordinary detail, but this answer is incomplete because it does not explain why the brain produces healing neurochemicals in response to a sugar pill. It does not explain the mechanism by which the abstract content of a belief, "This pill will relieve my pain," is translated into a specific molecular event, the release of endorphins from specific neurons. It does not explain the hard problem of placebo. How does meaning become molecule? This is where the investigation deepens. Because the question of how meaning becomes molecule is not merely a medical question. It is a question about the fundamental relationship between consciousness and physical reality. It is a question that quantum mechanics, uniquely among the sciences, has the tools to address. And it is a question that the traditions answered in their own languages, thousands of years before placebo was given a name. The next step is to examine the quantum bridge, the theoretical framework that may explain how a thought in the mind becomes a molecule in the body, how expectation becomes endorphin, how belief becomes biology. And that framework begins with the most revolutionary discovery in the history of physics, the observer effect. The hard problem of placebo is this: how does a thought become a molecule? How does the abstract content of a belief, "This pill will relieve my pain," translate into a specific biochemical event? the release of endorphins from specific neurons in the periaqueductal grey matter of the brainstem. The neural pathways are mapped. Benedetti has traced them in extraordinary detail. The prefrontal cortex generates the expectation. The expectation activates the anterior cingulate cortex. The anterior cingulate sends signals to the periaqueductal grey. The periaqueductal grey releases endogenous opioids. The opioids bind to receptors in the spinal cord and suppress pain transmission. The pathway is real, the molecules are real, the pain relief is real. But the pathway does not answer the hard problem. It describes how the signal travels from the expectation to the opioid release. It does not explain how the expectation, a mental state, an abstract representation, a meaning, initiates the signal in the first place. At some point in the chain, something non-physical, a belief, an expectation, a meaning, must cause something physical, a neuron to fire, a molecule to be released, a receptor to be activated. This is the mind-body problem applied to medicine, and it is the same problem that has haunted philosophy since Descartes separated mind and matter in the 17th century. If mind and matter are fundamentally different kinds of stuff, if thoughts are not made of molecules and molecules are not made of thoughts, then how does one affect the other? How does meaning become medicine? Candace Pert, a neuropharmacologist at Georgetown University, who discovered the opiate receptor in 1973, spent the latter part of her career arguing that the mind-body problem is an artifact of a false dichotomy. In her research on neuropeptides, small protein molecules that carry messages between neurons and between the brain and the body, Pert found that neuropeptide receptors are not confined to the brain. They are distributed throughout the body in the immune system, the gut, the heart, the skin, and the neuropeptides themselves are produced not only by neurons, but by immune cells, endocrine glands, and other tissues. The signaling system is not a one-way broadcast from brain to body. It is a distributed network, a web of molecular communication in which every tissue in the body participates. Pert called the neuropeptide system the biochemistry of emotions, and argued that emotions are not located in the brain. They are distributed throughout the body, encoded in the neuropeptides that circulate in the blood, bind to receptors on every cell surface, and alter the behavior of every tissue they contact. In this framework, the placebo effect is not mind controlling body. It is mind and body, a single integrated system connected by a web of molecular messengers responding as a whole to the meaning of the therapeutic context. Pert's work has been substantiated by the explosion of psychoneuroimmunology, the field that studies the interactions between the nervous system, the endocrine system, and the immune system. The field's founding insight, demonstrated by Ada and Cohen's conditioning experiments, and extended by hundreds of subsequent studies, is that these three systems are not separate. They share receptors. They share signaling molecules. They share information. The immune system has receptors for neurotransmitters. The nervous system has receptors for cytokines. The endocrine system modulates both. And consciousness through the cascade that begins with a thought and ends with a neuropeptide binding to an immune cell receptor modulates all three simultaneously. The conventional neuroscientific answer is that the problem is illusory. Mental states are brain states. Thoughts are patterns of neural activity. There is no gap between mind and matter because mind is matter. Mind is what brain activity feels like from the inside. The expectation of pain relief is a pattern of neural firing in the prefrontal cortex. That pattern causes downstream neural firing in the anterior cingulate. The anterior cingulate causes firing in the periaqueductal grey, and so on. It is neurons all the way down. No mystery, no gap, no hard problem. This answer works reasonably well for placebo analgesia pain relief through expectation. The neural pathways are mapped. the molecules are identified. The mechanism, while complex, is at least plausible within a conventional neurobiological framework, but it works much less well for the broader placebo phenomena. How does expectation alter immune function? The immune system is not directly wired to the prefrontal cortex. Immune cells circulate in the blood. They operate in tissues throughout the body. They make decisions which pathogens to attack, which cells to spare, how aggressively to respond based on molecular signals in their local environment. How does a belief in the brain reach an immune cell in the gut? How does the expectation of healing alter the behavior of a T cell or a natural killer cell that has never received a direct neural signal from the cortex? The answer involves a cascade of intermediaries: the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the autonomic nervous system, cytokines, neuropeptides, hormones. The brain's expectation alters the activity of the hypothalamus, which alters pituitary hormone release, which alters adrenal output, which alters cortisol levels, which alters immune cell behavior. The pathway exists, but it is long, indirect, and lossy. By the time the signal reaches the immune cell, it has passed through so many intermediary stages that the specificity of the original expectation should be thoroughly diluted, and yet the specificity is preserved. Skedlowski's conditioned immune response is specific immune suppression when suppression was conditioned, immune enhancement when enhancement was conditioned. The body does not produce a vague, general response. It produces the specific response that the mind expects. The specificity survives the cascade. The meaning survives the mechanism. This is where the investigation pushes beyond conventional neuroscience into territory that requires a different kind of explanation. Jeffrey Schwartz, a research psychiatrist at the UCLA School of Medicine, has spent 3 decades developing a framework that he believes addresses the hard problem of how mind affects matter. Schwartz began with obsessive-compulsive disorder, a condition in which patients experience intrusive, unwanted thoughts and compulsive behaviors that they cannot control through willpower alone. The standard treatment was medication, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors that alter brain chemistry. Schwartz developed an alternative, a cognitive behavioral technique in which patients learn to recognize their obsessive thoughts as brain-generated noise rather than meaningful signals, and then deliberately redirect their attention away from the obsessive thought toward a constructive activity. The technique worked. Patients who practiced Schwartz's method showed significant improvement in OCD symptoms comparable to the improvement seen with medication. Schwartz developed a 4-step program. Relabel: recognize the obsessive thought as a symptom of OCD, not a meaningful signal. Reattribute: understand that the thought is caused by a brain malfunction, not by reality. Refocus: deliberately shift attention to a constructive activity for at least 15 minutes. And revalue: recognize that the obsessive thought has no inherent value or meaning. The 4 steps are acts of attention. They are choices about where to direct the mind's focus. They require no medication. They require no external intervention. They require the patient to use their conscious mind to override their brain's habitual activity. But Schwartz went further. He used PET scans to image the brains of his patients before and after 12 weeks of treatment. The patients who improved through the cognitive technique showed measurable changes in brain activity, specifically reduced hyperactivity in the caudate nucleus, the brain region most associated with OCD, and normalized metabolic activity in the orbital frontal cortex. The same brain changes that medication produced, but produced by attention alone, by the deliberate, repeated, effortful redirection of mental focus. The mind had physically reshaped the brain, not over years, over weeks. And the reshaping was visible on PET scans, as clear and as measurable as the changes produced by pharmacological intervention. Schwartz's work has since been replicated and extended. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which, like Schwartz's method, involves the deliberate redirection of attention, has been shown to produce measurable brain changes in depression, anxiety, PTSD, and phobias. The changes are specific to the condition being treated. Depression treatment normalizes activity in the subgenual anterior cingulate. Anxiety treatment reduces amygdala hyperactivity. Phobia treatment alters the response of the insula to threatening stimuli. In each case, the mind through directed attention produces specific, measurable, lasting changes in brain structure and function. This is not a metaphor. It is neuroimaging data. Schwartz called this self-directed neuroplasticity, the ability of the mind to change the structure and function of the brain through directed attention. And he argued that the mechanism could not be fully explained by conventional neuroscience. In the conventional model, the brain generates thoughts. Thoughts are products of neural activity. If a thought changes neural activity, then neural activity is changing itself, which is circular. There is no external agent. There is no director. The brain is both the cause and the effect of its own change. Schwartz argued that this circularity is broken only if the mind, the directing agent that chooses where to focus attention, is not reducible to brain activity. If the mind is something that can act on the brain from outside the purely physical causal chain. This is where Schwartz turned to quantum mechanics specifically, to the work of Henry Stapp, a physicist at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory who has spent decades developing a quantum mechanical theory of mind-brain interaction. Stapp's framework is built on a feature of quantum mechanics that we have encountered before, but that takes on new significance in the context of placebo: the quantum Zeno effect. The quantum Zeno effect is named after Zeno of Elea, the ancient Greek philosopher who posed paradoxes about motion. In quantum mechanics, the Zeno effect refers to the following phenomenon. If you observe a quantum system repeatedly at short intervals, you prevent it from changing state. Observation freezes the quantum system in its current state. The more frequently you observe, the more effectively you freeze. This is not a theoretical curiosity. It has been demonstrated experimentally by Wayne Itano and colleagues at the National Institute of Standards and Technology in 1990, using beryllium ions trapped in a magnetic field. They showed that repeatedly measuring the ion's energy state prevented the ions from making the quantum transition to a different energy state. The more frequently they measured, the more completely the transition was suppressed. By Fisher and colleagues at Stanford in 2001, using cold sodium atoms in an optical lattice, the effect was confirmed with even greater precision. And it has a complementary partner, the quantum anti-Zeno effect, in which observation at certain intervals can accelerate rather than inhibit state transitions. The key insight is that observation is not passive in quantum mechanics. It is an active intervention that alters the dynamics of the system being observed. Stapp's insight was to apply the quantum Zeno effect to the brain. The brain is a physical system. At the molecular level, its components obey quantum mechanics. The ions that flow through neural channels, the neurotransmitters that bind to receptors, the synaptic vesicles that release their contents. All of these are quantum systems governed by quantum mechanical laws. Under normal conditions, these quantum systems evolve rapidly, transitioning between states, exploring multiple possibilities, decohering into classical outcomes. But if the mind, the conscious agent, repeatedly observes a particular brain state, the quantum Zeno effect would tend to freeze that state, to hold it in place. To prevent it from decohering into an alternative configuration, repeated mental attention to a specific neural pattern would stabilize that pattern not through classical force, not through energy transfer, but through the quantum mechanical effect of observation on the observed system. This is Schwartz's explanation for self-directed neuroplasticity. The OCD patient who repeatedly redirects attention away from the obsessive thought and toward a constructive activity is using the quantum Zeno effect. Each act of attention, each conscious observation of the desired brain state, rather than the obsessive brain state, holds the desired state in place and allows it to strengthen through Hebbian learning. The mind, through repeated observation, sculpts the brain, not metaphorically, physically, through a mechanism that quantum mechanics describes with mathematical precision. Now apply this framework to placebo. The patient who believes that a treatment will heal them is holding a specific expectation in mind, a mental representation of health, recovery, improvement. This expectation is a brain state, a pattern of neural activity in the prefrontal cortex and associated regions. Each time the patient thinks about the treatment, takes the pill, visits the doctor, participates in the ritual of healing, they are attending to this expectation. They are observing it. And each act of observation, according to the quantum Zeno effect, stabilizes the neural pattern that represents the expectation. The more attention the patient gives to the expectation of healing, the more firmly the healing pattern is held in the brain. And the more firmly the healing pattern is held, the more effectively it drives the downstream cascades, the endorphin release, the dopamine production, the immune modulation, the hormonal changes that produce the placebo response. In this framework, the placebo effect is not mysterious. It is a consequence of quantum mechanics applied to the brain. The mind, the conscious agent that directs attention, uses the quantum Zeno effect to stabilize specific brain states. Those brain states drive specific physiological cascades, and the result is healing, real, measurable, biochemically specific healing produced by the repeated conscious observation of an expected outcome. Meaning becomes molecule through quantum measurement. Belief becomes biology through the Zeno effect. The mind heals the body by watching the body heal. This is speculative. It must be stated clearly. Stapp's quantum mind theory is not mainstream neuroscience. Many neuroscientists reject it, arguing that quantum effects decohere too rapidly in the warm, wet brain to play any functional role. The decoherence objection is the same one that was raised against quantum biology in general, and, as we saw in our investigation of quantum biology of the heart, it has been weakened by the demonstration of quantum effects in photosynthesis, avian navigation, and enzyme catalysis, but it has not been eliminated. The experiments that would definitively confirm or refute the quantum Zeno effect in the brain have not yet been conducted. Stapp's framework is a hypothesis well formulated, mathematically rigorous, consistent with known physics, but a hypothesis nonetheless. However, the framework explains things that conventional neuroscience cannot. It explains how the specificity of placebo expectations is preserved across long physiological cascades. The quantum Zeno effect stabilizes the entire pattern, not just a vague signal. It explains why ritual and repetition amplify the placebo response. More observations mean more Zeno stabilization. It explains why open-label placebo works the ritual of taking the pill, the repeated attention to the healing context, provides the observation events even when the patient knows the pill is inert. It explains why the physician's confidence matters. A confident physician communicates certainty, which amplifies the patient's attentional focus on the expected outcome. And it explains the nocebo effect. Repeated attention to an expected harm stabilizes the neural pattern of harm, driving physiological cascades that produce the expected damage. There is another quantum dimension to the placebo phenomenon that must be examined, one that connects to our explorations of non-locality and the observer. Effect. The observer effect in quantum mechanics states that the act of observation influences the system being observed. In the double-slit experiment, observing which slit a particle passes through collapses the superposition and changes the outcome. The observer does not passively record what is already happening. The observer participates in determining what happens. Observation is not neutral, it is creative. If this principle applies to the body, if conscious observation of biological processes influences those processes, then the placebo effect acquires a deeper significance. The patient who believes they are being healed is not merely expecting healing. They are observing their body with a specific intention, the intention of healing. And if observation influences the observed system as quantum mechanics demonstrates at the subatomic level, then the patient's healing observation may be influencing the biological processes being observed. The immune cells being watched with the expectation of activation may activate. The pain pathways being watched with the expectation of suppression may suppress. The healing expected by the observer may be partially produced by the observation itself. There is a suggestive parallel in the heart math research we explored in the previous series. McCraty's experiments showed that the heart responds to future emotional stimuli before the brain does, and before the stimuli are randomly selected. If conscious observation can extract information from future events, as the pre-stimulus research suggests, then it may also be able to project intention onto biological processes. The observer does not merely receive, the observer shapes. And if the observer's shaping power extends from quantum particles in a laboratory to biological processes in a living body, then the placebo effect is not a curiosity of clinical medicine. It is a manifestation of one of the deepest principles in physics. Observation is participation. The observer and the observed are not separate. They are entangled, and the healing that the observer expects is, at some level, the healing that the observer produces. William Tiller, a physicist at Stanford, who spent decades studying the effects of human intention on physical systems, conducted experiments in which trained meditators directed specific intentions toward water, pH solutions, and biological systems. The results, published in peer-reviewed journals but controversial and not widely replicated, suggested that focused human intention could alter the pH of water, increase the activity of a specific enzyme, and influence the growth rate of fruit fly larvae. Tiller proposed that human intention acts as a conditioner of the local space, altering the thermodynamic properties of the physical environment in ways that conventional physics cannot explain. Tiller's work remains at the margins of mainstream science, but if even a fraction of his findings are valid, they suggest that the placebo effect is not confined to the patient's own body. The healer's intention, the physician's confidence, the shaman's conviction, the priest's faith may be physically active in the therapeutic encounter, conditioning the local space in ways that influence the patient's biology. This is the most speculative bridge in this investigation. The leap from quantum observation at the subatomic level to conscious observation of biological processes at the cellular and organ level is enormous. The scales are different by many orders of magnitude. The mechanisms of observation are different. The environments are different, and no experiment has demonstrated that conscious human observation directly influences cellular behavior through a quantum mechanical mechanism. The bridge is theoretical, not empirical. But consider the epigenetic evidence. A Marmond. Bruce Lipton, a cell biologist formerly at Stanford, has argued since the 1990s that the cell membrane, not the DNA, is the true brain of the cell. The membrane contains receptor proteins that respond to environmental signals, including signals from the nervous system, the endocrine system, and the immune system. These signals alter gene expression, turning genes on and off, modifying protein production, changing cellular behavior without altering the DNA sequence itself. This is epigenetics. And the signals that the membrane responds to include signals generated by mental states. Stress changes gene expression. Meditation changes gene expression. Social connection changes gene expression. Herbert Benson at Harvard demonstrated that the relaxation response, a meditative state of deep calm, first described by Benson in 1975, alters the expression of over 200 genes involved in immune function, inflammation, and cellular stress response in a single session. Sit down, relax, breathe, and 200 genes change their expression. Benson's team, working with genomics researchers at Massachusetts General Hospital, used microarray analysis to compare gene expression profiles before and after relaxation response practice. The genes that changed included those involved in oxidative phosphorylation, insulin signaling, telomere maintenance, and NF-κB, one of the master regulators of the inflammatory response. The relaxation response did not merely make people feel calm. It reached into the nucleus of the cell and flipped molecular switches. It reprogrammed the cell's operating instructions through breathing and focused attention. Subsequent studies extended Benson's findings. Long-term meditators, practitioners with thousands of hours of meditation experience, showed even more pronounced gene expression changes than novices. And the changes were cumulative. Experienced meditators showed persistent alterations in baseline gene expression, not just acute changes during practice. The genome had been durably reprogrammed by years of mental practice. The mind had written new instructions into the molecular machinery of the cell, instructions that persisted even when the practice was not being actively performed. Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2009 for her discovery of telomerase, collaborated with health psychologist Elissa E. Pell to demonstrate that psychological stress shortens telomeres, the protective caps on chromosomes. Shortened telomeres are associated with aging, disease, and mortality. Caregivers under chronic stress, specifically mothers caring for chronically ill children, showed telomere shortening, equivalent to 10 years of additional aging compared to mothers of healthy children. The longer the caregiving had lasted, the shorter the telomeres. Years of psychological stress had accelerated the molecular clock of aging. The mind had aged the body, but the effect was reversible. Blackburn and Epel demonstrated that meditation, specifically a form of loving-kindness meditation practiced for 12 minutes per day, increased telomerase activity, the enzyme that maintains and rebuilds telomeres. Exercise produced similar effects. Social connection produced similar effects. Stress reduction through cognitive reframing produced similar effects. The mind was not merely influencing subjective well-being, it was altering the molecular machinery of cellular aging. Thought was changing the length of chromosomes. Belief was modifying DNA. Dean Ornish, the physician who pioneered lifestyle interventions for heart disease, took this further. In a 2008 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, Ornish and colleagues showed that a comprehensive lifestyle intervention involving meditation, yoga, diet, social support, and stress management altered the expression of over 500 genes in men with prostate cancer. Genes involved in tumor suppression were upregulated. Genes involved in tumor promotion were downregulated. The intervention did not involve any pharmacological agent. It involved changes in how the men thought, ate, moved, and connected with each other. And these changes, psychological, behavioral, relational, reached into the nucleus of prostate cells and altered the expression of genes that controlled tumor growth. The mind did not cure the cancer, but the mind reached the genes that governed the cancer, and it turned them in the direction of health. The epigenetic evidence does not prove the quantum hypothesis. Gene expression can be altered through conventional biochemical cascades without invoking quantum mechanics. But the epigenetic evidence does prove something remarkable. The mind reaches the genome. Mental states alter gene expression. Psychological processes modify the molecular machinery of the cell. The gap between mind and molecule, the gap that the hard problem of placebo identifies, is bridged, in the epigenetic evidence, by a cascade of signals that begins with a thought and ends with a gene being turned on or off. The cascade is complex. It is multi-stage. It involves hormones, neurotransmitters, cytokines, and transcription factors, but it is real. And its reality means that the placebo effect, the healing of the body through belief, is not a violation of biology. It is a feature of biology. The body was designed to be influenced by the mind. The genome was designed to respond to experience. The molecules were designed to obey meaning. The question is whether quantum mechanics provides a deeper explanation for why this design exists, and whether the traditions, which described the mind's power over the body millennia before epigenetics was discovered, were accessing the same truth through a different method. Because the traditions did not wait for PET scans and gene expression arrays to discover that the mind heals the body. They knew. They practiced it. They developed elaborate technologies for harnessing the mind's influence on physical reality, technologies called prayer, meditation, visualization, faith healing, mantra, and ritual. And the convergence between what they discovered and what science is now measuring is, once again, too precise and too consistent to dismiss. Consider what we have established. The placebo effect produces specific neurochemical changes, endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, in response to expectation. The immune system can be conditioned by psychological association. Epigenetic changes, alterations in gene expression without changes in DNA sequence, can be produced by meditation, stress, social connection, and lifestyle changes. Telomeres, the molecular markers of cellular aging, respond to psychological state. Self-directed neuroplasticity, the reshaping of brain structure through directed attention, is visible on PET scans. And the quantum Zeno effect provides a mechanism, speculative but mathematically rigorous, by which conscious observation could stabilize the neural patterns that drive these cascades. The traditions knew none of this. Molecular detail. They had no PET scans, no gene expression arrays, no telomere assays. But they had something else. Millennia of direct experience with the phenomenon. Millennia of developing practices that harness the mind's influence on the body. Millennia of observing, refining, and transmitting techniques that produce healing through belief, intention, ritual, and faith. And the techniques they developed align, with startling precision, with the mechanisms that science has identified. The Christian practice of healing prayer involves focused attention on the intention of healing, the same directed attention that Schwartz's self-directed neuroplasticity requires. The Buddhist practice of Tonglen, taking in suffering and sending out healing, involves the deliberate generation of compassionate intention directed at the body, the same intentional observation that the quantum Zeno framework describes. The Hindu practice of Sankalpa, the formation of a specific healing intention during deep meditation, produces exactly the conditions that placebo research identifies as optimal for the placebo response. A clear expectation, a ritual context, a state of deep calm, and repeated attentional focus on the intended outcome. And the shamanic healing ceremonies found in indigenous cultures worldwide involve every element that placebo research has identified as pharmacologically active: confident healer, elaborate ritual, community witness, dramatic performance, and the patient's absolute conviction that healing is occurring. The next step is to enter these traditions fully, to examine their technologies of mind-body healing in detail, to map them against the neural, molecular, epigenetic, and quantum mechanisms that science has identified, and to ask the question that has haunted medicine since Beecher's battlefield discovery. Are the tradition's healing practices merely elaborate placebos? Or is the placebo effect merely the scientific name for what the traditions have always known? Every major healing tradition in human history has operated on a single assumption that modern medicine rejected and that modern science is now rediscovering. The mind heals the body, not as a secondary effect, not as a pleasant side benefit of positive thinking, as the primary mechanism. The healer's intention, the patient's faith, the community's witness, the ritual's structure, these are not decorations around the real medicine. They are the medicine. And the traditions develop technologies for deploying this medicine with a sophistication that placebo research is only beginning to appreciate. Christianity contains the most extensively documented healing tradition in the Western world. The healing ministry of Jesus of Nazareth is not peripheral to the Christian story. It is central. The Gospels record approximately 40 distinct healing events: blindness cured, leprosy cleansed, paralysis reversed, hemorrhaging stopped, deafness healed, demons cast out, and the dead raised. These accounts are not presented as metaphors for spiritual transformation. They are presented as physical healings events in which broken bodies were restored to wholeness through the power of faith. The mechanism Jesus identifies is consistent across the accounts. He does not say, "I have healed you." He says, "Your faith has healed you." Pistis, the Greek word for faith, trust, conviction. He locates the healing agent in the patient's belief. In the account of the woman with the hemorrhage, a woman who had suffered from continuous bleeding for 12 years and had spent everything she had on physicians without improvement, Jesus does not perform a ritual. He does not lay hands on her. He does not even notice her initially. She touches the hem of his garment in a crowd, believing that this contact alone will heal her, and the bleeding stops instantly. Jesus feels power leave him, turns around, identifies the woman, and says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." The active ingredient was not the garment, it was the faith, the conviction, the absolute certainty against all evidence, against 12 years of failed treatments, against every rational assessment of her situation, that healing was available and that she could access it through this single act of reaching out. From the perspective of placebo research, the elements are textbook. The healing context is maximally charged. A famous healer, a pressing crowd, a desperate patient. The patient's expectation is absolute. She does not hope for healing. She is certain of it. The ritual is specific and embodied, touching the garment, a physical act that anchors the belief in the body. And the outcome is immediate and dramatic. The hemorrhage stops. Benedetti's research on placebo mechanisms identifies exactly these elements as the drivers of the strongest placebo responses: high expectation, confident healer, embodied ritual, specific belief about the mechanism of action. But the Christian healing tradition goes beyond individual accounts. The early church practiced healing as a community function. James 5:14 instructs, "Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well." This is a protocol. It specifies the participants, the elders, the community. It specifies the ritual prayer and anointing with oil. It specifies the mechanism, faith. And it specifies the expected outcome, healing. The structure is identical to what Kapchuk calls the theatre of medicine, the performative context that amplifies the placebo response. The community provides social support and collective expectation. The elders provide authority and confidence. The oil provides a tactile, embodied ritual. The prayer provides focused intention directed at the healing outcome. And the faith, the shared conviction that healing is not merely possible but expected, provides the expectation that, as Benedetti has shown, drives the neurochemical cascade. The Christian healing tradition continued through the centuries with remarkable persistence. The Desert Fathers reported healings. The medieval saints were credited with cures that were investigated and documented by church authorities with surprising rigor. The canonization process requires detailed testimony from witnesses and, in many cases, medical documentation of the illness before the healing and the health after. The Catholic Church's investigation of miracles is, in its structure, a proto-scientific protocol. It requires the disease to be documented by physicians, the healing to be sudden and complete, the patient to have received no effective medical treatment, and the cure to be durable over time. The Pentecostal and charismatic traditions, the fastest growing segments of Christianity, worldwide, place healing at the center of worship. Healing services involve intense prayer, laying on of hands, anointing with oil, and the collective expectation of the congregation. The emotional intensity is extraordinary. Participants weep, shout, speak in tongues, fall to the ground in states of ecstatic surrender. The neuroscience of these states is only beginning to be studied, but preliminary research by Andrew Newberg at Thomas Jefferson University has shown that glossolalia, speaking in tongues, produces specific brain changes. Decreased activity in the frontal lobes, the brain regions responsible for conscious control, and increased activity in the parietal lobes and limbic system, regions associated with spatial awareness and emotional processing. The Pentecostal healing service creates a brain state in which conscious control is diminished and emotional somatic processing is enhanced. The same state that hypnosis, yoga nidra, and shamanic drumming produce. The mechanism may be identical across these seemingly unrelated practices. Lourdes, the French pilgrimage site where the Virgin Mary is said to have appeared in 1858, has a medical bureau staffed by physicians who investigate reported healings using medical records, imaging, and clinical examination. Since 1858, approximately 7,000 healings have been reported at Lourdes. The Medical Bureau has investigated hundreds and recognized 69 as medically inexplicable cases in which documented disease disappeared without medical explanation after the pilgrimage. The Bureau does not claim miracles, it claims the absence of medical explanation. The disease was documented by imaging, by biopsy, by laboratory testing. The healing occurred sudden, complete, durable, and no known medical mechanism accounts for the transition from sick to well. The most recent case recognized by the Medical Bureau, the 70th, confirmed in 2018, involved a nun named Sister Bernadette Moriau, who had suffered from a severe spinal condition requiring multiple surgeries and leaving her partially paralyzed and in chronic pain for decades. She was unable to walk without a brace and leg orthosis. After a pilgrimage to Lourdes in 2008, she experienced a sudden return of mobility and disappearance of pain. Medical examination confirmed that her neurological deficits had resolved without surgical intervention, without physical therapy, without any medical treatment. Her physicians had no explanation. The Medical Bureau spent 10 years investigating the case before declaring it medically inexplicable. 69 cases, now 70, over a century and a half, is not a large number. The vast majority of pilgrims to Lourdes are not healed of their physical ailments, and the Medical Bureau's standards are extremely conservative. They reject cases where any natural explanation is even remotely possible, but the cases they accept are striking. cancers that disappeared, organic diseases that reversed, paralysis that resolved. And the common element across the accepted cases is the psychological and spiritual state of the pilgrim, the intensity of faith, the depth of prayer, the quality of surrender to the healing process. The context is maximally charged: the sacred site, the holy water, the community of believers, the centuries of tradition, the expectation of the miraculous. Every element that placebo research identifies as amplifying the mind-body healing response is present at Lourdes, amplified to the maximum intensity that a religious context can provide. Buddhism approaches healing from a fundamentally different philosophical framework and arrives at practices that converge with the Christian tradition with remarkable precision. The Buddhist understanding of illness is rooted in the doctrine of dependent origination, the teaching that all phenomena arise in dependence upon conditions. Disease in this framework is not a random mechanical failure. It is a manifestation of conditions, physical, mental, emotional, karmic, that have converged to produce the symptoms. And healing, correspondingly, is not merely the application of an external remedy. It is the transformation of the conditions that produce the disease. Since mental states are among the most powerful conditions that influence physical health, as both the Buddhist tradition and modern psychoneuroimmunology agree, the transformation of mental states is a primary healing intervention. The Tibetan medical tradition, one of the most sophisticated traditional medical systems in the world, integrates physical and psychological treatment seamlessly. Tibetan medicine recognizes three fundamental causes of disease: desire, hatred, and ignorance, the three poisons of the Buddhist path. These psychological states produce physiological imbalances in the three humours of wind, bile, and phlegm that manifest as specific diseases. Treatment addresses both the physical symptoms and the psychological root. Herbal medicines, dietary changes, and physical therapies address the humoral imbalance. Meditation, ethical conduct, and spiritual practice address the underlying psychological cause. The Tibetan physician treats the whole person, body and mind together because the Tibetan medical framework does not recognize the separation between them. The practice of Tonglen, one of the most powerful healing practices in Tibetan Buddhism, is a direct technology for deploying the mind's influence on the body. In Tonglen, the practitioner breathes in suffering their own or another's, visualizing it as dark, heavy smoke entering the body. On the exhale, the practitioner breathes out healing, visualizing bright, luminous light flowing from the heart center to the person who is suffering. The practice is counterintuitive. It asks the practitioner to take in pain rather than avoid it. But the effect, reported consistently by experienced practitioners, is transformative. The practitioner's own suffering decreases. The person receiving the Tonglen, even at a distance sometimes, reports improvement, and the practitioner's physiological state shifts measurably. Tonglen activates the same neural circuits that Davidson measured in long-term meta practitioners: increased gamma activity, enhanced heart-brain coherence, activation of the insular and anterior cingulate cortex. The practice is doing something to the brain and body that is measurable, reproducible, and consistent with the mechanisms of placebo-focused attention. Specific intention, embodied ritual, compassionate emotional state. Mathieu Ricard, a Tibetan Buddhist monk and former molecular biologist who has been called the happiest man in the world after extensive neuroscientific testing demonstrated in Davidson's laboratory that Tonglen and metta practices produce brain states of extraordinary coherence. Ricard's gamma wave activity during compassion meditation was the highest ever recorded in neuroscience. His brain showed levels of integration between regions prefrontal cortex, insular, parietal cortex that the researchers had never seen. and his physiological markers during meditation showed the same profile that HeartMath associates with cardiac coherence, ordered heart rhythm, synchronized autonomic nervous system, reduced cortisol, enhanced immune markers. What makes Ricard's case particularly significant is his background. Before becoming a monk, he was a molecular biologist at the Institut Pasteur in Paris, working under the Nobel laureate François Jacob. He understands the science, he understands the methodology, and he chose, after completing his scientific training, to devote his life to the contemplative practices that produce the states science is now measuring. His choice was not a rejection of science. It was a recognition that the contemplative practices access something real, something that his scientific training could measure but could not fully explain. The Dhammapada, the most widely read text in the Theravada Buddhist tradition, opens with a declaration that could serve as the founding statement of mind-body medicine. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become. This is not philosophical speculation. It is a clinical claim. The mind shapes the body, thought becomes biology, and the practices of the Buddhist path, meditation, mindfulness, ethical conduct, compassionate intention, are technologies for directing this shaping process toward health, clarity, and awakening. The Buddhist tradition also recognizes what it calls the medicine Buddha, Paisaja Guru, a Buddha whose very name and image are considered healing. The practice of visualizing the medicine Buddha, imagining his lapis lazuli colored body, reciting his mantra, generating devotion and faith in his healing power, is prescribed in Tibetan medicine as a complement to physical treatment. The visualization is specific, the image is detailed, the mantra is repeated with focused attention, and the faith, the conviction that the medicine Buddha's healing power is real and accessible, is cultivated deliberately, systematically, as a therapeutic intervention. This is placebo technology of extraordinary sophistication. The image provides a focus for attention. The mantra provides repetition, the same repetition that the quantum Zeno effect requires to stabilize a desired mental state. The devotion provides the emotional charge that amplifies the placebo response, and the faith provides the expectation that drives the neurochemical cascade. Hinduism contributes the concept of Sankalpa, the deliberate formation of a specific intention during deep meditation. Sankalpa is not casual wishing, it is a precise mental act performed in a specific state of consciousness. The practitioner enters a state of deep relaxation, typically through yoga nidra, a practice of systematic body relaxation that produces a hypnagogic state between waking and sleeping. In this state, when the conscious mind is quiet and the subconscious is accessible, the practitioner plants a sankalpa, a short, clear, present tense statement of intention. I am healed. My body is whole. Health flows through every cell. The statement is repeated with feeling, with conviction, with a total engagement of the heart, and then the practitioner releases it, allows it to sink into the subconscious mind, where it operates beneath the threshold of ordinary awareness. The parallels with hypnotic suggestion and placebo are exact. The yoga nidra state corresponds to the hypnotic trance, a state of heightened suggestibility in which the subconscious mind is more receptive to directed intention. The sankalpa corresponds to the hypnotic suggestion, a specific instruction planted in the subconscious during the state of heightened receptivity, and the effects of hypnotic suggestion on physical health are well documented. Hypnosis has been shown to reduce pain, accelerate wound healing, improve immune function, and alter the course of skin conditions like warts and psoriasis. The mechanisms overlap with placebo expectation, focused attention, altered state of consciousness, specific intention. In a remarkable series of studies, hypnotic suggestion was shown to produce specific physiological changes in targeted body parts, increased blood flow to the hands when told, "Your hands are becoming warm," decreased gastric acid production when told, "Your stomach is calm," and measurable changes in immune cell activity when given specific immune-related suggestions. The specificity is extraordinary. The mind does not merely produce a vague healing effect, it produces the specific physiological change that the suggestion specifies. The Hindu yogis developed Sankalpa practice thousands of years before clinical hypnosis was formalized. The technology is the same, the framework is different, the results converge. The Ayurvedic medical tradition. India's ancient system of medicine operates on the premise that the mind and body are not separate systems, but expressions of a single underlying reality. The Charaka Samhita, one of the foundational texts of Ayurveda, composed approximately 2,000 years ago, states explicitly that the mind is the primary cause of both health and disease. The body and the mind are the substrates of disease and happiness, the text declares. The balanced use of time, intellect, and the objects of the senses is the cause of happiness. Ayurvedic treatment addresses the mental causes of disease as rigorously as the physical causes, through meditation, mantra, lifestyle modification, and the cultivation of sattva, the quality of clarity, harmony, and balance that the tradition identifies as the mental state most conducive to health. The concept of prana, vital energy, is central to Ayurvedic healing. Prana is not merely breath, though it is associated with breathing. It is the life force that animates the body, maintains health, and, when blocked or depleted, produces disease. Pranayama, the practice of controlled breathing, is prescribed as a therapeutic intervention because it directly manipulates prana, restoring flow, clearing blockages, and recharging depleted reserves. Modern research on pranayama has confirmed measurable physiological effects. Specific breathing patterns alter autonomic nervous system balance, reduce cortisol, improve heart rate variability, modulate immune function, and change the expression of genes involved in oxidative stress and inflammation. The Ayurvedic claim that pranayama heals is not metaphorical. It is, in the language of modern physiology, a claim that specific breathing patterns produce specific psychoneuroimmunological changes that shift the body from disease-promoting to health-promoting states. And the claim is supported by evidence. The Islamic tradition contains healing practices that align with placebo mechanisms in specific and measurable ways. Ruqyah, the practice of reciting Quranic verses over a sick person, is prescribed in the Hadith literature as a therapeutic intervention. The Prophet Muhammad is reported to have said, "Make use of the two cures, honey and the Quran." The practice involves a healer, typically an imam or religious scholar, reciting specific verses from the Quran over the patient, often while placing hands on the affected area. The recitation is rhythmic, melodic, and performed with deep conviction. The patient listens with faith, attention, and the expectation of healing. The community may be present as witnesses. The elements are pharmacologically active in the placebo sense. The authoritative healer provides the confident context. The rhythmic recitation provides auditory entrainment, the repetitive, melodic sound that alters brainwave patterns, shifting the patient from beta-dominant alertness to alpha-dominant relaxation. The physical touch provides the tactile dimension that amplifies placebo response. The faith provides the expectation. And the sacred text provides the meaning, the conviction that the healing power is not merely human but divine. Not merely possible, but guaranteed by the most authoritative source the patient recognizes. A study published in the Journal of Religion and Health in 2017 measured the physiological effects of Quranic recitation on listeners. and found significant reductions in heart rate, blood pressure, and cortisol levels, the same physiological signature that Benson's relaxation response produces, the same state that alters the expression of over 200 genes. Subsequent studies using EEG have shown that listening to Quranic recitation increases alpha wave activity, the brain rhythm associated with calm alertness and reduced anxiety in both Arabic-speaking and non-Arabic-speaking listeners. The effect was present regardless of whether the listener understood the words. The sound itself, the melodic structure, the rhythmic cadence, the harmonic complexity of classical Quranic recitation produced measurable neurological changes. This suggests that the healing effect of sacred recitation may operate through auditory entrainment as well as through faith and meaning. A dual mechanism in which the sound changes the brain directly and the meaning changes the brain through expectation. The two channels reinforce each other, producing a healing effect that is greater than either alone. Indigenous shamanic traditions worldwide have developed healing practices that exploit every mechanism that placebo research has identified. The shamanic healing ceremony is, from the perspective of placebo science, the most complete therapeutic intervention ever developed. It includes an authoritative healer, the shaman, who has undergone years of intensive training, including initiatory ordeals that establish absolute authority in the community's eyes. It includes an elaborate ritual drumming, chanting, dancing, costume, sacred objects, altered states of consciousness that creates a maximally charged healing context. It includes community participation. The entire village may be present, their collective attention and expectation, amplifying the healing field. It includes specific diagnosis. The shaman identifies the spiritual cause of the illness, providing a coherent narrative that gives meaning to the patient's suffering. And it includes dramatic performance. The shaman may extract objects from the patient's body, journey to the spirit world, battle the disease entity, and return with the cure, a performance so vivid, so convincing, so emotionally overwhelming that the patient's entire psychophysiological state is transformed. Michael Harner, an anthropologist at the New School for Social Research, who studied shamanic practices across cultures, observed that the shamanic healing ceremony activates what he called the shamanic state of consciousness, an altered state in both the shaman and the patient that facilitates healing. Harner's observations align with the neuroscience of altered states. Drumming at 4 to 7 beats per second entrains theta brainwave activity, which is associated with deep relaxation, hypnotic suggestibility, and enhanced access to subconscious processing. The ceremony creates the optimal neurological conditions for the mind to influence the body, the same conditions that yoga nidra creates, that clinical hypnosis creates, that deep prayer creates. Claude Lévi-Strauss, the founder of structural anthropology, analyzed shamanic healing in his famous essay, The Sorcerer and His Magic, and reached a conclusion that anticipates modern placebo research by half a century. The shaman's power, Lévi-Strauss argued, does not reside in the shaman alone. It resides in the system, the triangle of the shaman's conviction, the patient's faith, and the community's expectation. All three are necessary. A shaman who doubts his own power cannot heal. A patient who does not believe in the shaman cannot be healed. A community that does not witness and validate the healing cannot sustain it. The healing is not an individual act. It is a social act, a collective deployment of meaning, expectation, and conviction that transforms the patient's psychophysiological state. This triangular structure is precisely what placebo research has identified as the architecture of the healing context. Kapchuk's work at Harvard has shown that the therapeutic relationship, the quality of the interaction between healer and patient, is the most powerful predictor of placebo response, more powerful than the specific placebo intervention used. A warm, empathetic, confident physician produces stronger placebo effects than a cold, detached, uncertain one, regardless of whether the treatment is real or sham. The healer's conviction amplifies the patient's expectation. The patient's expectation drives the neurochemical response. And the social context, the witnesses, the community, the shared narrative of healing amplifies both. The Aboriginal healing traditions of Australia add a dimension that connects directly to the quantum biology we explored in the Heart series. Aboriginal healers, called Ngankhari in some traditions, describe their healing work as operating through a subtle energy that pervades the body and the natural world. The healer perceives this energy directly, seeing it, feeling it, manipulating it, and redirects it within the patient's body to restore balance. The descriptions are remarkably consistent with the concept of the body's electromagnetic field, the same field that HeartMath measures, the same field that extends beyond the skin, the same field that encodes emotional and physiological state information. The Ngankhari does not describe what he does in terms of electromagnetic fields. He describes it in terms of spirit. But the phenomenon he describes, an invisible field of energy that pervades the body, carries information about health and disease, and can be perceived and influenced by a trained healer, is structurally identical to the electromagnetic and biophoton fields that science has measured. The convergence across traditions is not a coincidence. It is evidence. Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, and Shamanic traditions independently developed healing practices that activate the same mechanisms: focused attention, specific intention, emotional charge, embodied ritual, authoritative healer, community witness, altered state of consciousness, and absolute faith in the healing outcome. They did not coordinate. They did not borrow from each other. They discovered, through millennia of trial and error, the same principles that placebo research has identified through decades of controlled experimentation. And the practices they developed are not primitive precursors to modern medicine. They are sophisticated technologies for deploying the mind's influence on the body, technologies that exploit mechanisms that modern medicine is only now beginning to understand. The question that remains, the question that the final part of this investigation will confront, is what this convergence means. If the tradition's healing practices work through the same mechanisms as placebo, expectation, attention, ritual, faith, does that reduce the traditions to mere placebo? Or does it elevate placebo to something far more significant than clinical medicine has assumed? Is placebo the explanation for traditional healing? Or is traditional healing the explanation for placebo, the demonstration, refined over millennia, that the mind's influence on the body is not an anomaly to be controlled for in clinical trials, but a fundamental feature of biological reality that medicine has been systematically ignoring? The standard medical interpretation is reductive. Placebo, in the standard view, is a confounded nuisance variable that must be controlled for in clinical trials. It is interesting but ultimately trivial, a cognitive bias, a neural artifact, a curiosity of self-report. The real medicine is the drug, the surgery, the radiation. The placebo response is noise that obscures the signal of the real treatment. But consider what this interpretation requires you to believe. It requires you to believe that a phenomenon capable of producing endogenous opioids, dopamine, immune system changes, gene expression alterations, and measurable brain restructuring is trivial. It requires you to believe that a phenomenon that matches the outcomes of surgical interventions is a confound. It requires you to believe that a phenomenon observed in every clinical trial ever conducted, across every medical specialty, in every country, for over 70 years, is noise. It requires you to believe that the thousands of healers across every tradition, the shamans, the priests, the yogis, the monks who devoted their lives to developing and refining technologies for deploying this phenomenon, were confused about the most fundamental aspect of their practice. The alternative interpretation, the interpretation that the traditions have maintained for millennia and that the quantum framework we explored in Part 2 supports, is that the placebo effect is not a confound, it is a clue to the deepest relationship in the universe, the relationship between consciousness and matter, between the observing mind and the observed body, between meaning and molecule. The drug adds something, the surgery adds something, but the mind, the expecting, intending, believing, attending mind, adds something too, and the thing it adds is not incidental, it is foundational. It is the reason that the body heals at all. The traditions understood this. They built their entire medical systems around it. They developed practices, prayer, meditation, visualization, ritual, community healing that harness the mind's influence on the body with sophistication and precision that modern medicine is only beginning to match. And they did this not because they were prescientific primitives who did not know better. They did it because they knew something that modern medicine forgot, that the mind is not a passive observer of the body. The mind is a participant in the body. The mind shapes the body. The mind heals the body. And the mind, when properly trained, properly directed, properly supported by ritual, community, and faith, can do things that no drug can do alone. The answer, as we will see, depends on what kind of universe we live in, and that is where quantum mechanics, the traditions, and the deepest question in medicine converge. 3 lines of evidence, 3 entirely independent approaches to the same mystery, and they converge on a conclusion that is as radical as anything in the history of science or medicine. The mind is not a passive observer of the body. The mind is a participant in the body. The mind shapes the body. And the body, far from being a machine that operates independently of thought, belief, and meaning, is designed, at every level of its architecture, to respond to the mind's instructions. The first line is clinical. 70 years of placebo research, from Beecher's battlefield saline to Kapchuk's open-label sugar pills, demonstrate that expectation produces measurable biological change. Endorphins from belief, dopamine from hope, immune modulation from conditioned association, gene expression changes from meditation, telomere maintenance from compassion, sham surgery that matches real surgery, and the nocebo shadow, the body producing disease from the expectation of disease, death from the certainty of death. The clinical evidence is not anecdotal, it is not marginal. It is the most replicated finding in the history of medicine. Every drug trial, every surgical study, every therapeutic intervention produces a placebo response that must be accounted for. Placebo is not the exception. It is the rule. The body responds to meaning, always, without fail. The only variable is the magnitude of the response. The second line is mechanistic. The neural pathways are mapped prefrontal cortex to anterior cingulate, to periaqueductal gray, to endogenous opioid release. The psychoneuroimmunological connections are established. Neuropeptide receptors on immune cells, cytokine receptors on neurons, the bidirectional highway between brain and immune system. The epigenetic evidence is definitive meditation changes gene expression, stress shortens telomeres, lifestyle intervention alters the expression of 500 genes in cancer cells, and the quantum framework, Schwartz's self-directed neuroplasticity, Stapp's quantum Zeno effect, the observer effect applied to biological systems, provides a theoretical mechanism by which conscious attention could stabilize specific neural patterns that drive specific physiological cascades. The mechanism is not fully established. The quantum hypothesis is speculative, but the pieces fit together with a coherence that demands serious attention. The third line is contemplative. Every major healing tradition, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Taoism, Shamanic traditions, worldwide independently developed practices that harness the mind's influence on the body. Healing prayer, Tonglen, Sankalpa, Ruqya, Shamanic ceremony. These practices were developed through millennia of trial and error by practitioners who devoted their entire lives to understanding the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. They did not have PET scans. They did not have gene expression arrays. They had attention. They had discipline. They had the willingness to experiment on themselves for decades. And what they discovered, the technologies they developed, the principles they identified, the practices they transmitted, aligns with the mechanisms that modern science has identified with a precision that cannot be attributed to coincidence. Now, let us confront the deepest question. What does this convergence tell us about the nature of reality? There are two possible answers. The first is the deflationary answer, the answer that most scientists would give. The tradition's healing practices work through well-understood psychological mechanisms, expectation, conditioning, social support, stress reduction, altered states of consciousness. These mechanisms operate through the neural, hormonal, and immune pathways that psychoneuroimmunology has mapped. No quantum mechanics is needed, no mysticism is implied. The traditions stumbled upon effective psychosomatic techniques through trial and error, wrapped them in religious language, and transmitted them through culture. The placebo effect explains the traditions. End of story. This answer is not wrong. It is incomplete. It explains the mechanism without explaining the mechanism's existence. It explains how belief becomes biology, without explaining why biology is set up to respond to belief in the first place. Consider, evolution optimizes organisms for survival. Every feature of the body, every organ, every pathway, every receptor exists because it conferred a survival advantage. The placebo response is a feature of the body. It involves dedicated neural pathways, specific neurotransmitter systems, receptor networks distributed throughout the body, and a capacity for gene expression change in response to mental states. This is not a glitch. This is not a side effect. This is an evolved system, a system that natural selection built, maintained, and refined over millions of years. Why? Why would evolution build a body that heals itself in response to belief? The evolutionary question goes deeper. The placebo response is metabolically expensive. Producing endorphins requires energy. Modulating immune function requires energy. Altering gene expression requires molecular machinery that must be maintained. Evolution does not build expensive systems unless they provide a substantial survival advantage. The placebo response, therefore, must provide a substantial survival advantage, and it must do so through the mechanism of meaning-based healing, not merely through stress reduction. If stress reduction alone were the function, a simpler system would suffice. The elaborate multi-pathway, neurochemically specific, gene expression-altering placebo response exists because the body needs to respond to meaning, because meaning carries survival-relevant information that cannot be transmitted through any other channel. The healer's confidence, the community's support, the ritual's structure, the narrative's coherence, these carry information about the environment's safety, the social group's investment in the individual's survival, and the probability that the illness is survivable. The body reads this information through the placebo response, and it adjusts its physiology accordingly. But this evolutionary explanation, sophisticated as it is, still treats meaning as a proxy for something else. Meaning, in this framework, is a signal that the brain interprets as evidence of safety or danger. The body does not respond to meaning itself. It responds to the neurochemical translation of meaning, the cortisol, the oxytocin, the dopamine. Meaning is the input, neurochemistry is the mechanism, and the output is biological change. The deflationary answer says, because the stress response is costly. Chronic stress suppresses immune function, impairs healing, and accelerates aging. The relaxation response triggered by safety cues, social support, and the expectation of care reverses the stress response and restores immune function. Placebo is simply the relaxation response triggered by the therapeutic context. The body is not responding to belief per se. It is responding to the neurochemical signature of safety, the reduction in cortisol, the increase in oxytocin, the shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic dominance. Belief is a trigger, not the active ingredient. The active ingredient is the neurochemistry of safety. This explanation covers some of the data. It explains why social support improves health outcomes. It explains why a warm physician produces better outcomes than a cold one. It explains why the ritual of treatment, the context of care, amplifies the healing response. But it does not explain why sham surgery matches real surgery. The sham surgery patient is not merely relaxed. They are anesthetized, incised, and subjected to an elaborate deception. The stress response is not reduced by sham surgery, it is activated. The body undergoes the full physiological stress of a surgical procedure, and yet it heals as though the surgery were real. The relaxation hypothesis cannot account for this. Something beyond stress reduction is operating, and it does not explain open-label placebo. Kapchuk's patients know the pills are sugar. The deception is removed. The expectation of a specific pharmacological effect is eliminated, and yet the healing occurs. The patients are not relaxed by the belief that they are receiving real medicine. They know they are not. They are engaging in a ritual, taking a pill, following a protocol, participating in a therapeutic relationship, and the ritual itself produces biological change. The meaning of the ritual, not the expected pharmacological effect, not the reduction in stress, but the meaning of participating in a healing process is pharmacologically active. This is where the deflationary answer reaches its limit. Meaning. The body responds to meaning, not just to neurochemistry, not just to stress reduction, not just to conditioned associations, to meaning, the interpretive, symbolic, narrative dimension of experience that has no obvious place in a purely material account of biology. The blue pill calms because blue means calm. The red pill stimulates because red means energy. The brand name placebo outperforms the generic placebo because the brand means quality. The confident physician heals better than the uncertain physician because confidence means competence. The sacred text heals because it means divine authority. The sham surgery heals because it means surgical repair. In every case, the active ingredient is not a molecule, it is a meaning, and meaning is not a physical substance. It is not reducible to neural firing patterns or neurotransmitter concentrations. It is a relationship between a sign and what the sign represents. It is interpretation. It is understanding. It is consciousness making sense of experience. And this is where quantum mechanics becomes not merely a speculative bridge, but a necessary framework. Because quantum mechanics is the only physical theory that gives consciousness a role in determining physical outcomes. In classical physics, consciousness is an epiphenomenon, a passive byproduct of brain activity that has no causal power. In quantum mechanics, consciousness, or more precisely, observation, plays a constitutive role. The observer does not merely record what happens. The observer participates in determining what happens. The wave function does not collapse on its own. It collapses upon observation. The outcome is not determined until it is observed. Measurement does not reveal a pre-existing fact. It creates a fact. If this principle applies to the body, if the conscious mind's observation of its own biological processes participates in determining the outcomes of those processes, then the placebo effect is not an anomaly. It is a prediction. A universe in which observation determines outcomes is a universe in which the mind's observation of the body determines biological outcomes. The patient who observes their body with the expectation of healing is participating through the quantum mechanical role of observation in the determination of their biological state. The expectation is not a wish, it is an observation. An observation, in quantum mechanics, has causal power. Von Neumann, one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century and one of the architects of quantum mechanics, formalized this insight in his 1932 treatise, Mathematical Foundations of Quantum Mechanics. Von Neumann showed that the equations of quantum mechanics do not specify where the wave function collapses, where the transition from multiple possibilities to a single outcome occurs. The collapse could occur at the measuring apparatus. It could occur at the nerve signals traveling from the retina to the brain. It could occur at the level of conscious awareness. Von Neumann placed the collapse at the level of the observer's consciousness, what he called abstract ego. This is known as the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation, and it places consciousness at the center of quantum mechanics. If consciousness is what collapses the wave function, if awareness is what determines which possibility becomes actual, then the conscious mind is not an epiphenomenon, riding passively on top of physical processes. It is the agent that selects physical outcomes from a field of possibilities. And the placebo effect is what this selection looks like when applied to the body. Eugene Wigner, von Neumann's colleague and a Nobel laureate in physics, extended this reasoning. He argued that the inclusion of consciousness in the equations of quantum mechanics is not optional. It is required. Without consciousness, the chain of quantum correlations extends indefinitely. Each measuring apparatus becomes entangled with the system it measures, and no definite outcome ever occurs. Only consciousness, the aware observer, breaks the chain and produces a definite result. If Wigner is right, then consciousness is not a byproduct of physics. It is a necessary ingredient in physics. And its causal role in collapsing quantum states provides the mechanism at the most fundamental level of physical reality for the mind's influence on the body. This does not mean that you can cure cancer by thinking positively. It does not mean that belief alone is sufficient for healing. The quantum Zeno effect stabilizes existing quantum states. It does not create states from nothing. The mind can influence the body's trajectory. It can amplify healing processes that are already present. It can shift the balance between competing biological outcomes, but it cannot violate the laws of physics. It cannot regenerate a severed limb. It cannot reverse a genetic disease. The mind's influence is real, but bounded. It is powerful, but not omnipotent. And the traditions understood this too. No healing tradition claims that faith alone cures all diseases. They claim that faith participates in healing, that the mind contributes, that consciousness matters, and the science agrees. Let us trace the connections to the investigations we have conducted before. The observer effect explored in our investigation of the quantum observer and the evil eye is the foundation. The peer laboratory demonstrated that conscious intention can influence random physical systems. The placebo effect demonstrates that conscious intention can influence biological systems. The mechanism may be the same. The quantum mechanical role of observation in determining outcomes, scaled from random number generators to neural pathways, immune cells, and gene expression. The observer effect is not confined to physics laboratories. It operates in the hospital room, the healing ceremony, and the meditation cell. The biological antenna explored in our investigation of the body as a receiver connects to the heart's role in placebo. McCraty's research shows that the heart detects future emotional stimuli before the brain does. If the heart is a quantum antenna receiving information from the quantum vacuum, coupling with the non-local correlations that pervade space-time, then the heart may play a central role in the placebo response. Cardiac coherence enhances cognitive function, broadens perception, and improves access to intuitive information. The traditions locate healing in the heart, not in the brain. The HeartMath finding that heart coherence produces measurable improvements in immune function, hormonal balance, and cognitive performance suggests that the heart's coherent state may be the physiological foundation of the placebo response. The healer who says heal from the heart may be giving a precise physiological instruction, not a metaphor. The synchronicity investigation connects to the timing of healing. Spontaneous remissions, the disappearance of disease without medical treatment, often occur at moments of profound psychological or spiritual transformation. The timing is synchronistic. The inner transformation and the outer healing coincide in a way that cannot be explained by the mechanics of the inner event alone. If synchronicity is a manifestation of the implicate order, a moment when the deep connections between events become visible, then spontaneous remission may be a synchronistic event. The inner shift and the biological healing may be connected not by a causal cascade, but by a meaningful coincidence, an expression of the implicate order in which psychological transformation and biological healing are aspects of a single enfolded pattern. The vibration series connects to the role of sound in healing. Shamanic drumming, Quranic recitation, Buddhist chanting, Hindu mantra, every tradition uses rhythmic sound as a healing technology. The neuroscience of auditory entrainment confirms that specific rhythmic frequencies alter brainwave patterns, shifting the brain from beta-dominant stress states to alpha and theta states associated with relaxation, suggestibility, and enhanced mind-body coupling. The vibrations are not metaphorical, they are physical sound waves that enter the ear, are transduced into neural signals, and alter the oscillatory patterns of the brain. The traditions discovered, through centuries of practice, the specific frequencies and rhythmic patterns that produce the brain, states most conducive to the mind's influence on the body. They did not understand the neuroscience. They understood the effect, and the effect is real. The light series connects to the visual dimension of healing. The perception of light, uncreated light, divine light, the luminous nature of mind, is reported by advanced practitioners across every tradition as a sign of deep healing and transformation. If biophoton emission is a marker of biological coherence, as Pop's research suggests, then the perception of inner light during deep meditation or healing prayer may correspond to an increase in biophoton coherence. The practitioner is not hallucinating. They are perceiving, with the eyes of the heart, a measurable shift in the body's photonic field. The light is real, it is biological, and it may be a marker of the state in which the mind's influence on the body is maximally potent. The Death Superposition series explored whether consciousness persists beyond biological death. The placebo investigation adds a dimension to this question. If consciousness can alter gene expression, modulate immune function, and restructure the brain, if consciousness has causal power over the body, then consciousness is not merely a product of the body. A product does not alter its producer. An effect does not modify its cause. The fact that consciousness can change the body suggests that consciousness is not reducible to the body, that it has a degree of independence, a capacity for agency that a purely material account of consciousness cannot accommodate. The traditions have always claimed this. The placebo effect provides the most accessible evidence for it. The Universal Neural Network series explored the possibility that individual consciousnesses are nodes in a larger network. The social dimension of placebo, the amplification of healing by community support, by the healer-patient relationship, by the collective expectation of the group, suggests that the placebo response is not purely individual. It is relational. It is networked. The healing that occurs in a Pentecostal service, a shamanic ceremony, or a Lourdes pilgrimage is amplified by the collective consciousness of the participants. The peer-bonded pair effect, 6 times larger than individual effects, suggests that emotional connection amplifies consciousness's influence on physical systems. The community heals more effectively than the individual because the community generates a stronger field of coherent intention. The network amplifies the signal. The Timeless Existence series explored the block universe, the physics of time in which past, present, and future coexist. McCraty's prestimulus research shows that the heart perceives future events before they occur. If the body can receive information from the future, and if this information can influence present biological states, then the placebo response may have a temporal dimension that conventional medicine has not considered. The patient's future health may be reaching backward through the quantum correlations of the block universe to influence the patient's present biology. The healing may not be caused by the belief. The belief and the healing may be aspects of a single pattern, a pattern that extends across time, visible from within as a sequence of cause and effect, but from outside, from the perspective of the block universe, as a single, simultaneous, meaningful whole. Now let us confront the objections one final time. Placebo does not cure everything. It does not eliminate tumors reliably. It does not reverse genetic diseases. It does not regrow lost limbs. The mind's influence on the body, however real, has limits. These limits must be acknowledged honestly, clearly, and without qualification. Any framework that claims the mind can cure anything is not science. It is wishful thinking. And wishful thinking, however comforting, is dangerous. It leads people to reject effective medical treatments in favor of unproven alternatives, and people die as a result. But acknowledging limits is not the same as dismissing the phenomenon. The mind cannot cure everything, but it can produce endorphins, dopamine, and serotonin. It can modulate immune function. It can alter gene expression. It can change telomere length. It can restructure the brain. It can match the outcomes of surgery. And it can, in rare but documented cases, produce complete remission of serious disease without any medical treatment. These are facts. They are measured. They are replicated. And they demand an explanation that goes beyond "it is just the brain doing brain things." The explanation that best fits the data from the clinical evidence, from the quantum framework, from the traditional testimony is this: the mind and the body are not separate systems. They are aspects of a single integrated reality, a reality in which consciousness and matter are not different substances, but different expressions of a common ground. The traditions call this ground Brahman, or Tao, or the ground of being, or the implicate order. Quantum mechanics describes it as the wave function, the mathematical object that contains all possible states of a system and that collapses into a specific outcome upon observation. The wave function does not distinguish between mental states and physical states. It includes both. And the observer, the conscious agent that collapses the wave function, does not observe from outside the system. The observer is part of the system. Mind and body are entangled. They arise together. They influence each other. And the placebo effect, the healing of the body through belief, expectation, ritual, and meaning, is the most direct evidence available to ordinary human experience that this entanglement is real. You are not a mind trapped in a body. You are not a ghost in a machine. You are a single integrated system in which consciousness and biology are woven together so intimately that a thought can produce a molecule, a belief can alter a gene, a meaning can heal a wound, and a conviction absolute, unwavering, total, can sometimes produce a healing that no drug, no surgery, no medical intervention can match. The traditions knew this. The science confirms it. And the question that remains, the question that no experiment can answer for you, the question that only your own experience can resolve, is what you will do with this knowledge. Will you continue to treat your body as a machine separate from your thoughts, independent of your beliefs, indifferent to your meanings? Or will you begin to treat it as what the evidence suggests it is, a partner, a collaborator, a responsive, intelligent, meaning-sensitive system that is listening at every moment to what you think, what you believe, what you expect, and what you intend? The body is listening. It has always been listening. Every thought you have ever thought has been heard. Every belief you have ever held has been received. Every expectation you have ever formed has been processed, interpreted, and translated into biological action, neurochemical, immunological, hormonal, epigenetic. Your body is the physical expression of your inner life. It is the autobiography of your consciousness written in flesh and bone and blood. The traditions say, write a better story, focus on healing, generate love, cultivate faith, practice gratitude, direct your attention deliberately, repeatedly, with discipline and patience toward the outcomes you desire, not because wishing makes it so, but because attention is not passive. Attention is an act. Attention is an intervention. Attention, the quantum Zeno effect in its biological expression, holds states in place, stabilizes patterns, strengthens pathways. What you attend to, you amplify. What you ignore, you allow to decay. The mind is not a spectator. The mind is a sculptor, and the body is the clay. The practical implications are specific, not vague. First, the quality of your attention to your body matters. When you are ill, do you attend to the illness with fear and catastrophizing? Or do you attend to the healing processes, the immune system mobilizing, the cells repairing, the body doing what bodies are designed to do? The placebo research is clear. Attention to the expected outcome amplifies that outcome. Fear amplifies disease. Faith amplifies healing. This is not magical thinking. It is the quantum Zeno effect applied to your own neurobiology. Second, the quality of your relationships matters biologically. The peer-bonded pair effect, the HeartMath social coherence data, the Pentecostal community healing, the Shamanic collective ceremony, all point to the same conclusion. Healing is amplified by connection. The isolated patient heals more slowly. The supported patient heals more quickly. This is not a moral platitude. It is a measurable physiological fact. Your relationships are pharmacologically active. The people who love you are contributing to your biological health through mechanisms that science can measure and that the traditions have always understood. Third, ritual matters. The act of taking a pill, the structure of a healing ceremony, the rhythm of a prayer, the discipline of a meditation practice. These are not decorations. They are delivery systems. They are the vehicles through which meaning reaches the body. Kapchuk's open-label placebo works because the ritual of pill-taking, even without deception, provides the embodied, structured, repeated context that the mind-body system needs to activate its healing cascades. Create rituals, follow protocols, establish practices. The structure is the medicine. Fourth, find your tradition. Not because one tradition is more correct than another, but because the placebo response is amplified by meaning, and meaning is most potent when it is embedded in a framework that you genuinely believe in. The Christian heals through prayer because prayer carries meaning for the Christian. The Buddhist heals through meditation because meditation carries meaning for the Buddhist. The secular patient heals through the medical ritual because the medical establishment carries meaning for the secular mind. The tradition is the container. The meaning is the medicine. Find the container that holds meaning for you. This is not New Age wishful thinking. This is the convergence of 70 years of clinical research, 3 decades of neuroimaging, a century of quantum mechanics, and 4,000 years of contemplative practice. The evidence points in one direction. The traditions point in the same direction. And the direction is this: you matter. Not just morally, not just spiritually, physically. Your consciousness matters to your biology. Your beliefs matter to your cells. Your expectations matter to your genes. Your meaning matters to your molecules. The placebo effect is not the most embarrassing phenomenon in modern medicine. It is the most important. It is the crack in the wall of the materialist paradigm, the evidence, hiding in plain sight in every clinical trial ever conducted, that the universe is not what the machine metaphor promised. It is not a collection of separate parts operating through blind mechanical forces. It is a web of meaning in which consciousness and matter are partners, in which observation participates in outcome, and in which the oldest healing technology in human history, the technology of faith, attention, ritual, and love, turns out to be not primitive superstition, but sophisticated quantum biology, practiced by masters who understood, through direct experience, what science is only now beginning to measure. The body is listening. What will you tell it?